Hello everybody, and welcome to my Halloween adventure. We're going to be talking about ghosts and a little bit of history and just some really cool things from around our haunted little city. Now, if you grew up in this town, you have most likely heard of this book, The Hauntings of Sparta. You've seen the cover most likely with the house. You've read some of the stories within. Well, I am here with sort of a revisitation of this book. Growing up, I always found it so fascinating. I'd read it over and over again, and I knew a lot of the stories by heart. And it led me, I think, to this point where I wanted to make a video of my own and be able to tell some of the more recent stories and a little bit of history and delve into some of the stuff that wasn't in the book. I have some stories from friends, I have some stories from people around town, and I have some fun adventures for you in store tonight. Now, be safe, have fun, and I will see you at Rolling Hills. First on the agenda, Rolling Hills, built in 1871 and has seen its fair share of death and mistreatment and everything under the sun that could cause for it to be very, very haunted today. I went to go visit with my boyfriend, and we did a little bit of looking around, and so enjoy that little portion. When we came up to this side of the building, I immediately had felt a dark presence. I think he was up in the tower where the barred window was watching us, and I asked Emilio if he had felt it, and he said that he did. And then we decided to go at night. And immediately when I got out of the vehicle, I felt as though there was something dark and heavy just in that area again, in that corner. I felt like as though there was a barrier and I couldn't walk any closer than I had. And then in my head, I heard the words, "Leave. I don't want you here." And I immediately told Emilio and his cousin, "Get back in the car. It doesn't want us here," and we left. So, to get into a little bit more of the history, is when the original building was built in 1871, They had purchased the original 200 acres for $5,000. Then later on that year, the state considered building a second building to separate the poor from the insane, but they didn't do that until about 1899, just because the building had not met standards anymore for fire safety or health or anything. It was so packed to the brim that they had no other choice but to build a separate home. In their definition, traits of being applicable to the asylum was being handicapped in any way that made it so that you could not work, or in a way that they chose not to treat. Suicidal tendencies, having traits of insanity, or bipolar disorder or mania, or any sort of mental health that made it difficult for somebody to live properly, or at least in their eyes. Most people who were moved to the poorhouse when it was built were the elderly, or people who just couldn't work. The original Rolling Hills building was originally kept as the hospital, and in 1920s, mainly the elderly were left, but they had been moved to the Rolling Hills building, and they ended up changing it into a retirement home, which it remained until it was condemned a couple of years ago now, and they had built the entirely new Rolling Hills building across the street from it. And now that you know some of the basics, we can continue on to some of the stories of the people who live there, and viewer discretion is advised. These stories are not told to disrespect anybody or disrespect the history of Sparta. I've always just found these sorts of things interesting and wanted to know more. So, yeah. In 1871, they deemed the current management unfit and claimed him to be insane. And now, to 1897, there was a man admitted against his will, subjected to the horrors of within, of bad treatment of inmates, extreme uncleanliness of the building, and the criminals within, and having to see how people with illnesses that could be treated were left to die. When he was finally able to escape, he went out giving speeches about what he had seen and how it was very uninhabitable, and the government just decided to shut him up again. And it was the entire thing was completely covered up by the state, which was very sad and showed the negligence that they had to this poor building. Then at one point, the poor might have been auctioned off to houses to be like indentured servants. And if they were found to be able to work, they were denied assistance from the state from that point on, even though many of them were returned back to the asylum because they could not work or they were not deemed fit by the people who had bought them. They could not work or they were not deemed fit by the people who had bought them. Many of the inmates were admitted by a Dr. Beebe, like a man named Andrew Halleck, who was admitted 3 times until he stayed and died his 3rd time in the asylum. Another man who was admitted by the doctor had $75 in his bank account when he entered, and the asylum held on to it until he died. And then it was redeposited into his bank account. And I really do not think that this is a normal thing, especially with the fact that it was put into the notes. And now on to some of the more sensitive content. Named Michael Heiser committed suicide in the asylum. He hung himself with his bed sheets, but a year before, his wife attempted to slit his throat in the poorhouse at the age of 60. Something notable about quite a few of the deaths that happened is that they were caused by paralytic stroke. And if you don't know what a paralytic stroke is, it is when somebody dies because they had a stroke caused by not enough oxygen flowing to the brain and the heart. And that is not an extremely common thing, so why there was a higher rate of it happening, I don't really want to speculate on, but I think you know where I'm going with it. But another man died due to blood poisoning from a carbuncle on his neck left untreated. There were quite a few deaths that happened that seemed untimely or treatable or just very strange. And I don't think it is incredibly unreasonable to think that this place is haunted and feel that negative energy whenever you do end up walking up towards the building. Yeah. So that is my section on rolling hills. Next, we will be going on to cemeteries. So see you there. So, as you can tell by the mere fact of me making this video, I have a certain affinity for the haunted and the history of Sparta of old places. And one of my favorite spots currently is, I believe is one of the older cemeteries in town. McCoy of Fort McCoy was buried here. I'll show the video like here. And I'm currently sitting in a tree. But I wanted to tell a story about this cemetery. So, I was walking down, exiting the cemetery, by that little road there you can see. And I was exiting, and in the corner of my eye, I saw this tall man, and I didn't see his face, but I saw like he was wearing like a black t-shirt and what looked to be like cargo shorts, and he looked as though he was like a veteran or something. And I looked away, and something inside me was like, wait, that wasn't a man. There wasn't actually somebody there. And I look back, and he was gone. And I do not know if he was Quackenbush or Quakenbush, whichever way you say it, or one of the other headstones that was buried there. But I do know that I saw him. So there's a little fun ghost story for you in the mix of my cemeteries from me and my little adventure, you know. And yeah, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. We'll keep going with more stories, and yeah, hopefully in the next story I'll be in the other cemetery across town behind the Walmart. So yeah, thank you. So, St. Hope Cemetery, the one up behind the Walmart. I have a story, a short one, from a good couple of Halloweens ago. I started going there with a close friend of mine at the time, and then went on Halloween with, I don't remember if it was that friend or if it was another person. I don't know if there was anybody else there. I do know I went with somebody, but we had gone up towards like the main entrance, not the side entrance or anything, but the entrance like right in the middle, you know. And it was getting very dark out, and we had walked like up through like the beginning area, but as we drew closer towards that that road that leads you up through the middle of the strip up towards the like getting deeper into it, it was obviously very dark over there because there's so many trees, but I had felt this unbearable heavy energy, and my friend did too. And before we could even like get up to the tree line, we decided to turn around and leave because we just knew something did not want us there. Now, I think the cemetery is very interesting because there's a forest in the middle and there's forest all the way around it, and just how big it is. But yeah, that is the only story I have from here. The cemetery behind rolling hills. I decided to add this portion to this section of the video due to the fact that it's a cemetery and I don't know much of the history of it. Going into the cemetery involves a small hike through a cornfield, and around the bend you'll find a chain link fence. And I'd say it looks smaller than it is when you're coming up upon it because it's kind of built on a hill, but it is probably the best spot in town for a sunset. I'm unsure of how many people were buried there, but it still has a pretty intense feeling when you walk in on it. Like, it feels as though they were left to be abandoned there. And not many people know that it's there, which I think is very saddening. But it is very beautiful. You can sort of see like a small portion of it from behind the Rolling Hills building itself, but you can't really see much of it. There is somewhat of a dark energy there though. When you walk up into it, like I said, it feels like they were abandoned, and they're not all of them feel like they're entirely kind. And even my great-grandmother, who, when she went up to see the sunset one day up on the Rolling Hills building, she caught a very small glimpse of the cemetery and said herself that it didn't, like, she felt a dark energy over there. I think that it is very justified for the spirits there to not want anybody to enter. From what I know, they all died either in the poorhouse or the asylum, and it feels as though they were just left there to be forgotten and hidden away, like a lot of the darker stuff. Hello everybody to this portion of the video where I tell my personal stories and submitted stories. We are going to first start off with short and sweet. So, many of the homes in Sparta are very haunted, if you weren't aware. I grew up in a house that I don't believe was haunted when I first moved in, but very quickly became haunted. And so did many of my friends. And yeah, so here is my first short and sweet story for you. When Emilio's cousin Jay was little, they lived in a house over on Julie Avenue. And he drank a lot of soda, and he had some empty 2-liter bottles by his door. And one night he woke up either around 2 or 3 a.m. and he looked up towards the door, and an empty 2-liter bottle just came flying past his head. And understandably so, he changed rooms with his brother the next day. I think that would be very terrifying. And yeah, whether it threw it because it didn't want to be seen by him or just for whatever reason, it is a truly terrifying story for a younger child to have and then grow up with and remember. So that leads to my next story of another one of my friends. When she was little, she was down in her room trying to go to bed, and she was laying in her bed, and she looked up and she saw what looked to be like somebody sitting down in her bed. She didn't see an apparition or anything, but the bed lowered, like somebody had sat down. And then she felt a leg on her hand, and she very quickly got up and ran upstairs to her grandmother. Which I think is completely understandable. The house that I grew up in was not haunted at first, but I think became haunted as I grew up and became a teenager. And in particular, one spirit I remember was a tall figure of a man. He was shadowy, and he had a large brimmed hat and looked to be wearing like a trench coat. And he lived on our porch. And once in a while, he would come over to the office door, which was connected to the living room, and I would see him while I was trying to watch television. And he would dart back and forth on the porch once in a while, and I felt this awful, like, dark energy about him. And for a long time, I tried to ignore him, because I didn't really know how to deal with ghosts at the time. And it became very difficult when I came out of the shower and there was just a big, meaty handprint left on the mirror. After that, I didn't see much of him, but I knew he was around. And then once I finally, knew to sage the house and put salt down and all of that good stuff, I finally got him to leave me alone. And after a while, I think he ended up just leaving the house because I haven't seen him since. But yeah. And as I got older, I moved in with my boyfriend and his family. And the moment I walked into that house, I knew that it was haunted. And I had weird dreams of an old Victorian woman living in the house. And I saw like shadows once in a while moving that just didn't make sense. And I didn't say anything until his mother spoke up and said that she knew that there was a spirit of a woman in the house, and she had dreams too of like an old Victorian style woman walking around the house. And I didn't think she was malicious or anything. She didn't have any evil intent. In fact, I think she likes children, so that it wasn't really an issue. But when it came to an end for me was one night I was having a weird dream, I'll call it, I guess, of the woman just standing over Emilio, staring down at him. And at that moment, I asked her to leave us alone. She was welcome to the rest of the house, but just not into our bedroom. And she respected that. But she did not leave. Probably about a month ago now, Emilio was watching his little brothers, and he heard like footsteps upstairs, and he thought that it was his little brother had woken up from his nap, and he was like on the stairs, and he was calling for him, and then he saw like a shadow move into one of the rooms, and he thought he was awake, so he went up, and he found him asleep, like just totally asleep. So I do believe that woman still haunts that house. But like I said, I don't think she's malicious or anything. And the house that I currently live in is haunted indeed. At first, when we got here, there was a spirit of an older woman. And I didn't think she was malicious or anything. And I think she just wanted to stay in her home. And I asked her to leave us alone, and she did that, and I never really heard anything from her, and I felt her once in a while, but it wasn't like anything scary. I just knew she was there. But for the most part, she left us alone, and she never came upstairs or anything. And then I left for Texas and came back. And when we got here, I didn't feel anything, like she, I don't know if she had left or whatever, but I just didn't feel anything. And the moment that our roommate came, I immediately felt a presence of something, and it felt like it was trying to hide itself from me. And I left it alone, but every once in a while, out of the corner of my eye, it would look like somebody's coming up the stairs, but I wouldn't hear anything. And just darting around dark corners and stuff. And it was very strange. And I was laying in bed one night, and we have like a blue light in the corner of our room on top of our like TV cabinet. And everything was like dark besides that. And I was looking up at the ceiling. I was trying to fall asleep. And like a little bit closer than my peripherals, I saw a dark shadow move from that corner all the way over towards the bed and then over towards the corner of the room. And the next day, I don't know how it came up in our conversation, but I was like, I know that there's a spirit here, and I think it came with you, to my roommate. And he confirmed that he had seen it, he knew about it and everything. And I asked it very kindly to leave us alone, and I saged our whole room. I put pink salt in our doorway and our windows and everything, and in the corners, and did everything I could. And I haven't really heard much from it, but for some reason, I think that the old woman is back. Now, this is a story from today. I was home alone. Our roommate was gone. Emilio was gone. His dad wasn't here. Like, there was nobody here. And I was editing this video, and I took a break because I was a little frustrated, and I heard like a light knocking on the door at the bottom of our stairwell. And I was very confused, but I went to go check it out because I thought maybe it was our roommate or something. And nobody was there, and Blue, our dog, was running around like somebody had been at the door, you know? So I like checked all the doors, and then I realized I heard a humming coming from his dad's room. And it was like a woman humming, like a mature woman. And I very quickly ran up the stairs and closed the door behind me because it was just not something I wanted to deal with in that moment. Um, but yeah, to my friends who are here at the premiere party, say hi to the ghosts while you're here, I guess. And yeah. And another story I have for you that's a little bit unrelated is one of my close friends worked at the Mary Morrow home for quite a while, I'd say, actually. And one of her patients said one day that he said starving children were following him around all day. And then the next day, he died. And that really freaked her out. And I have to wonder if maybe he had lived in like the child care center or worked there or something and knew some of the children that were there, and they were there to take him, like, like just take him away as he passed. That's just speculation though, I don't really know. And now on to a little bit more of the scary stories I have for you. I had a friend who moved to Sparta many years ago at this point, I guess. And I knew her in middle school, and when she was here, her family and her had went to go to free skate at the hockey rink. And it was like winter, it was dark, and like the trees were bare, and she looks over, like out of the car. She looks over out of the car window, and she sees a tall, slender figure standing behind a tree looking at her. And her whole family felt like a very bad energy just around that hockey rink that night. But they decided to skate anyways. And the next day, like she went home and she fell asleep, and the next day she woke up with scratch marks like from fingernails deep on her body. And her family decided never to go back for good reason. Another story I have for you is I had a friend who in middle school she had a friend who she would sleep over at her house quite a bit. And that house was very, very, very haunted. Every time she would go, something would happen out of the normal, and very often she felt like a cold figure standing behind her. It got to the point where the family had to put salt in the doors and the windows and everything to try and keep something at bay. And apparently, the house had underground tunnels. And you might think this is strange, but the House of Shadows also has underground tunnels beneath it. So, not out of the ordinary. And now we are going to move on to the Walgreens portion of this video. This might seem kind of unexpected, but the Walgreens in town is actually quite haunted. Essentially, all of the people who work at Walgreens or have worked there knows that that place is haunted. There are many accounts and many stories of either seeing a specter or feeling it's there or hearing it. But first, I'm going to start off with one of the more scary stories that I have heard that happened there. So, one of the girls that was working there was in like the back area. It's like one long corridor with like, you know, like overstock and goods all over and stuff like that. And there's like a little like space, like a bigger space at the end of it that leads to like cardboard crushing and stuff like that. And she was over in that area, getting her cart ready to bring stuff out, and she looks over into the hallway and she sees what appears to be a specter with long fingers and nails and extremely long hair, and seemed to be like really skinny and just unnaturally long. But it was like up in one of the shelves, like sort of like packed in there, you know? And she looks away because she only sees it for a second, and she looks back, realizing what she saw, and it was gone. But whenever I would go back there, or anybody else would go back there, they would have this really eerie, horrible feeling that they were being watched. And I would go back there particularly, and I would be like, you know, grabbing carts to go stock or something, and I would just know that there was something in there watching me. And one time, out of the corner of my eye, I saw like a tall, dark figure standing down the way, because the lights only turn on by motion, you know, so it saves energy. And I just very quickly grabbed my cart and I got out of there. But there was one night when I was working. It was maybe like around like 7:30 or something. I was close to the end of my shift, and my manager was like sort of in the back area, and he was stocking, and I was like near the front door, and I was putting like plants up or something, and I thought I heard footsteps of a customer walking around, which was very strange because, you know, I was near the front. I would have seen somebody come in, but I didn't see anybody. But, you know, I left it alone. I was like, oh, maybe I just missed somebody while I was doing something. And my manager thought he heard somebody too. And like maybe 10 or 20 minutes goes by and nobody comes to the checkout counter or anything. And I look up in the mirror and I think I see like a tall black figure of somebody walking. So I just, you know, I leave it be. And yet still nobody comes to the front. And more customers come in, you know, I check them out, and still nobody that I hadn't seen come in, you know. And my manager comes up and I was like, hey, I think the ghost is in the store tonight, because I thought I heard somebody in the store, but there was nobody there. And he said that he had heard the same exact thing, footsteps. He had expected somebody to be there, and he thought he saw somebody, but there was no one. So there you go. And sometimes things go missing, or like they're out of place. Like one of my other managers, she'd be there like early in the morning doing tags, and one time she did a whole row of tags. She knew they were correct and everything, and she went back because she had like an extra one from another stack, and all of the tags were out of place, like not where she had put them. So clearly something had moved those. And I think quite a lot of people have felt it too as they come in, because there have been nights where the whole store just feels angry and upset, and like just something is wrong even though there's nothing wrong. And customers will come in who are usually like cheery and sweet, and they were just angry that night, like just for no reason whatsoever, like really. And it felt like their mood would completely change as they walked in, and then as they left, they seemed to be fine. So I think that it really did affect people and continues to. But yeah, there's my section on Walgreens. If you weren't aware, it is very haunted. And, I think quite a few of the places are haunted in Sparta. Yeah. And now to go on to the House of Shadows. It was once known as a child care center. It was built in 1910, and a lot of devastating things happened to the children there. But I want to say the children are not malicious. I do not wish to paint them in a bad light because they are sweet. They are just very much pranksters, and that is the only home that they have, So be kind. Don't really be afraid of the children because they're not something to be afraid of, And yeah. So to start this off, many people who have worked there have felt, the occasional like tugging on shirts, or coughing or laughing, or footsteps like where they shouldn't be. And even one year when I worked there, for some reason the music in our room was going from like very, very, very quiet or extremely loud, like blasting for no reason. And the person I was working with in that room had gone to check because they knew where, like the control center was, and where the people would be to help us. And while they were gone, all the lights in my room went out completely. And in that moment, I heard little footsteps running through and very slight giggling. And it scared me half to death. But I know that the children were just having their fun that night. And when the lights went back on, there was nothing. And my partner came back, and they said that, and the people in the control room said that everything should be perfectly fine. Like they hadn't changed, like the volume of our music or anything. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting. And another day that I worked that year, I was in a different room, and I didn't really know my way to that room, but I was supposed to be with my partner. And, we did the come out to the crowd and everything, and then we all ran back inside, and my partner ran off without me for no reason. And I didn't really know where I was going, but for some reason, it looked like there was like a girl in front of me running, and I just decided to follow her. And I came into my room, just like that. She had led me there, but when I got into my room, there was no other person to be seen. So I think a specter was very, very kind, and she led me into the room and left me because she knew I'd found my way. And that was very chilling when I looked back at it, but also very kind of that child to do that for me. Now, the number one rule that I think everybody is taught when they work at the House of Shadows is always to say, "Hello, children," and "Goodnight, children." And my friend, who I'm going to be reading her story here in a minute, reiterated that to me. But she followed it up with the fact that sometimes when she or her friends who were working forgot to say goodnight, they would come back the next day and the lights would be on, or things would be moved or completely hidden altogether. And they're the kids for the most part, and older folks, but they mainly just play jokes on them. But the boss's child is sensitive to these children too, and is very connected to them. And once in a while, the ghost will play with her ponytails. So that's a little fun fact. But now I move to the truly chilling story that I have for the House of Shadows tonight. My friend calls this one Eleanor. I'm going to be reading this off my laptop, so sorry if I'm not looking directly into the camera, but this one is very much worth it. A few years ago, my friend worked in a room with a kid at the House of Shadows. It was the year she dressed up as a nun, and he was her scare partner, but he was narcoleptic and would fall asleep at random times, like standing up or in different positions, so she just used it to her advantage. Every time he would fall asleep, though, the activity in that area of the house would pick up. She ended up peeking through the curtain in the next room and saw a little girl in a white dress. Brown wavy hair to her shoulders, beautiful brown eyes, and wearing cloth shoes. She was smiling. "Eleanor," she said, and then with the next strobe light, she was gone. Next week, same thing. Her buddy fell asleep. She looked in the next room and saw the same girl, not smiling. She looked concerned. Then again, with a flash of the strobe light, she was gone. The following night, she went in before they opened and asked for communication and got nothing right away. So she said they could use some of her energy as needed. As a sensitive, she says she should have known better to put a boundary on how much energy the spirit could draw from her. Later that night, her buddy went home sick, and around 8:30, she became her. Then all she could remember was hitting the floor. Everyone around her in the other room said she was still doing her job, but instead of screaming, she was crying. A staff member went through the house and saw her like that and asked what was wrong, and she said something like, "I fell and hit my head." He carried her out of the house, and when she hit the threshold, she stopped crying. She went in later that night and communicated to the ghosts that they couldn't take more than a little bit of energy from her or she'd faint again. It hasn't happened since. But the craziest part is, when she told her coworker, he told her wife about it, who used to work in the building when it was a nursing home. She said there was an old woman named Eleanor who would read stories to the children no one else could see. There's no other record of Eleanor amongst the kids, so the guess is that the little girl in white thought that she was Eleanor. Another story that I have from the House of Shadow, a very short one, is that a friend of mine was working there down in like the basement area where it was all sandy and everything, and he was setting up some stuff, and the strobe lights kept, like, they flashed 3 times, and then there was nothing. And then about an hour later, again, 3 times, and then there was nothing. And obviously that was very strange, and he's really not sure of the occurrence of it, other than it might have been a spirit. But another story from my friend's girlfriend told me that she was working one night, and they had a kid in like a little like crawl space area to be a scarer, and he was the smallest one, so they put him in there. And at the end of the night, when he came out, he had handprints, like little children's handprints, just all over the back of his shirt. And it was very clear in that moment that the children had been, touching him all night and like messing with him. So, yeah. So, those are my stories for the House of Shadows. Out of respect, I'm not going to be telling some of them that I do know. But I do want to say again that the children are very kind. You just really have to, just be polite to them and say like, hello children and good night children and stuff like that. And I really hope that anybody who does end up visiting is very respectful. Please. Yeah, that's all I have to say about the House of Shadows. It is a mystifying place, built way back then, and a lot of the original buildings that were built there are gone now, but the ones that are remaining is the school, Maplewood, which is now Sales, the gymnasium, which they use for gymnastics now, that big storage building on the corner, the House of Shadows, the building next to it, the building in the field, and then the house on the corner, which belonged to, I don't know if he was the president of like the association or what he was, but he owned like that land and the buildings and everything. And yeah, it is a very interesting place, and it is very historical, I'd say, with the way that the buildings are built. And if you had ever gotten to get a chance inside of Maplewood, honestly, there is a lot of weird energy in there. When I was little, I went to Maplewood, and everybody was telling their ghost stories and having fun with it. But I one time went to go use the bathroom, and it was like the middle of class or something, and it was like a study session time or something, and I opened the door, but as soon as I felt the doorknob, it felt cold, and not just like temperature wise, like the energy itself just felt off. And I opened the door, and in the corner it was just so dark, like darker than it should have been, and I very quickly decided to leave the bathroom and just hold it until like later on that day so I could use the bathroom on the other side of the building. And yeah, that is something I do remember from my childhood. The Maplewood building now, I'm not really sure if there's been a lot of like ghost energy or anything, but yeah, I do have that little story to tell. So this is a story. It's a little bit long, so that's why I'm putting it in a little bit separately. That my friend who gave me her House of Shadows story gave me this one as well. This story took place in her grandfather's house. It was originally his aunt's house, and when she died, he inherited it. As a kid, she always had dreams when she was there of a frail old lady in a green dress, walking up the stairs to a spinning wheel on the landing, and she was singing, "You Are My Sunshine." She didn't know who the lady was until her grandfather passed away, and she found a painting of her from the 40s in a green dress. Now when her grandfather passed away in that house, she was 13. She took care of him until he passed, and afterwards she would get wafted with the smell of his cigarettes and cologne. One day when she rode her bike past the house, she saw him in the window. His widow lived there, and she said she could stop by any time. She went in, and she could always smell his Pall Mall blues. One day, when it was a very bad day, she went over and was crying, having a minute in the room he died in, and she heard, "I know you're crying. I'll see you on the other side." The words from his favorite song by Ozzy that played at his funeral. Cigarette smoke and Axe body spray smell filled the room and then was gone, and that was the last time that she was in that house. And I very, very much appreciate her giving me her story and opening up with that to me, because that is obviously very, very special. And she says that her grandfather is a very important person to her, and I just really appreciate her telling me that story. And now for one of the final portions of the video. This one's a little bit short, but we will be talking about Keps and Ginny's Cupboard. So Keps, back in the day, used to be soap sensations, and you've probably read the soap ghost story in the Hauntings of Sparta book, and nobody really knows quite how it got there. There's some thoughts that maybe it was dropped there's thoughts that maybe it was dropped with a big shipment of headstones at the time, or it was put there in memorial of somebody because they couldn't afford a plot or something. But one of the biggest theories is that there is maybe a woman down there. And a lot of people think that because there is a woman ghost that is there. And you probably know how there was a woman energy there. And most speculate that it's due to the fact that there is a headstone in the basement. If you've read the book, it talks about how she would be upstairs with the lights on, throwing her own little party of sorts, or she'd be moving things around, or knocking things off tables and stuff like that. And even my cousin is in that story. He was part of the small group that went down into the basement, and they set up all of their video recording and everything, and they spent the night. And yeah. And although I'm not exactly sure if she remains, there is talk of a male specter there. And part of the story, part of the origins of this story goes back to the original owners of Soap Sensations. One of the ladies was down in the basement, and she heard a conversation between a female and a male coming like from outside the room, and she thought that like somebody was, she thought her coworkers were there, and she went to go check and say hi, and just as she had walked out, one of her male co-workers had just come down the stairs, like he had just gotten there. And she immediately knew, oh, it wasn't them. There must be a male figure here too. And I went into Kep's and I asked about, there's the spirit and if she was still there. And my nice friend who works there told me she didn't know if the spirit of the woman was there, but she thought that there was a male specter there. And context for this, she didn't know previously that there was a male figure there. She had not read the book or anything, and this came out of her own experience, where she had been going downstairs, and right as she got to the bottom, she felt like the energy of a yell and a push from a male energy, and she immediately went back upstairs. And when I told her that there was thoughts of a male specter there, she was very surprised, not because she didn't know that there was a male specter there, that it was already in the book, and that she was correct in thinking that way. Kep's is such a nice store, though. It's really fun to go in, and the ladies are all very nice and kind. And yeah, if that male specter is there, I don't think he ever comes upstairs. And it's just like a really fun place to visit. And yeah. And then my next story goes to Ginny's Cupboard. Many of you who live in Sparta know about Ginny's Cupboard. It's downtown Water Street. I used to work there probably about 3 years ago at this point. And when I entered, I knew that there was a spirit immediately. And the owner, she hadn't told me that there was a spirit there at the time. But when I mentioned, hey, I think there's an energy, she started talking immediately about a woman's spirit that was there, and how she liked to sort of follow people and move things around and do some silly stuff. And I felt her a lot of the times that I was there. And she used to be a customer, and when she died, she decided to come and haunt Ginny's because she was a very consistent customer who visited almost every week. And she was kind, just kind of silly, but once in a while I'd be going down to the basement and I would feel her following me up the steps, like right behind me, which is a little off-putting, but I think it's fun to know that she's there. And yeah. The owner of Ginny's Cupboards also owns the house on Spring Street. The big scary one on the corner, the one on the cover of the Hauntings of Sparta book. And yeah, that house is haunted by a woman named Adelia. She was the wife of the man who constructed the building. And she likes to say hello to people as they go by. There is a tall tower at the top of the house, and once in a while, a lot of people have said as they walked by they saw a woman standing up there staring down at them, and then the next moment she's gone. And even I have a story of it was a fall day, it was kind of dark, and I was walking down that direction, and as I was walking by, I looked over at the house and I looked up in the tower and I saw a woman standing there. And I looked away and I looked back up and the curtain was then closed. And now the owner has told me that people do not go up there. So it is very common for people to see the spirit that is up there. And a lot of people have also said that they've seen a light coming out from up there. And even when I was little, I had a friend who lived like across the way, kind of kitty corner, and she would see a light coming from up there once in a while. I remember we would stay up sometimes and try and see if we could see a woman or a light, and we never did, but it was a fun thing to do anyways. And yeah, there was not a lot that I could gather from downtown besides like those couple of stories and my experience of being in Ginny's and everything. But I hope that once in a while, when somebody walks into Ginny's or something, they'll feel that woman's energy, or they'll go into Keps and they'll I hope they'll feel something that isn't quite in the normal. But yeah, those are my stories, and I hope you enjoyed them. And thank you for watching this video through this last portion. I will have my little outro here, so see you in a second. Hello everybody. I hope you very much enjoyed going on this Halloween adventure with me tonight. I hope you got some good scares, some good stories, and a little bit of history in there. I hope everybody has a good, safe, but scary Halloween filled with lots and lots of different ghosts or friends. And I hope that when you go home tonight, or if you are home, you might just see somebody or feel somebody you didn't before. Have a happy Halloween.